the beginning of the film, we are introduced to Nancy, a young woman who has just discovered she is pregnant. She confides in her best friend, Tabitha, nervously revealing the positive result. When asked about the father, Nancy hesitates before admitting she is unsure. Her recent involvement with multiple partners makes it impossible to determine. Nancy works at a restaurant during the day, so she quickly heads to her shift. While driving and absorbed in music, her car unexpectedly breaks down, leaving her stranded roadside. With no other option, she begins walking. Along the way, she encounters Bobby, a coworker who commutes by bicycle. To avoid being late, Nancy hops on Bobby's bike, and together they rush to the restaurant. Upon arrival, Nancy heads straight to the office of the restaurant's owner, who, in a surprising twist, is also her father. She has just been promoted to manager, and her father wastes no time emphasizing the responsibilities that come with the role. He reminds her that she must now lead with discipline and maturity, as her colleagues will look to her for guidance. Coincidentally, her father has a date scheduled for that evening. Nancy's mother passed away years ago, and he now feels ready to seek companionship again. Since he'll be out, he asks Nancy to stay late and handle the closing duties. Later that night, while cleaning, Nancy notices leftover food on a customer's plate and suddenly feels nauseated. She rushes to the back and vomits. Jake, the restaurant's chef and her father's trusted confidant, witnesses the incident and grows suspicious. Could Nancy be pregnant? When her father arrives and sees her sick, Jake quickly intervenes, attributing her illness to spoiled meat. Her father accepts the explanation without question. With her father gone for the evening, Nancy resumes her duties. Shortly thereafter, Peter, a kind employee with a mental disability, accidentally spills water on the floor. Nancy responds with understanding and does not reprimand him. However, the situation escalates when a group of local teenage troublemakers arrive on bicycles. They're not there to dine, they're there to cause disruption. Hoping to prevent conflict, Nancy steps outside to confront them. Yet her pregnancy has left her more irritable, and her patience wears thin. She snaps at her staff, scolding Peter for not cleaning up quickly enough. The tension intensifies when the teenagers return, this time wearing masks. They feign interest in ordering food, but their true intent is to provoke Nancy. Frustrated, she loses her composure and demands they leave. The teens mock her, laughing even as she threatens to call the police. One of the masked teenagers smirks and taunts Nancy, warning they'll return in 10 minutes. Overwhelmed and feeling unsupported, Nancy lashes out, not only at the troublemakers but also at her own staff. She reprimands Bobby, Peter, and even Jake for standing by passively. Jake, the restaurant's senior employee and her father's trusted chef, attempts to de-escalate the situation, suggesting the teens were merely joking and that Nancy may have overreacted. But Nancy, too upset to listen, impulsively fires him on the spot. The room falls silent. Even Jake is stunned. Despite his long-standing role and loyalty, he's been dismissed. Jake pleads with her, explaining his financial burdens, bills, insurance, and a critical prescription, but Nancy remains firm. She stands by her decision and orders him to leave. After the confrontation, Nancy retreats to the restroom to compose herself. Bobby, concerned, checks on her, but she snaps at him, telling him not to pretend to care. Now alone for the remainder of the night shift, Nancy calls her father to inform him of Jake's termination. He's shocked and chastises her for acting so rashly. While the menu may be manageable, replacing Jake won't be easy, especially with the restaurant already facing financial strain. Though she could have closed early, mounting bills force Nancy to keep the restaurant open until morning. Alone in the quiet space, she tries to shake off the tension, playing music, cleaning, and even dancing under the disco lights for a moment of levity. But her brief reprieve is shattered when she notices the teenagers' bicycles parked ominously across the street. They've returned. Nancy grabs the loudspeaker and warns them she's calling the police. Instead of retreating, the masked teens laugh and begin pounding on the restaurant windows, louder, harder. Panicked, Nancy calls the police. But the response is disheartening. All units are currently occupied with a murder investigation, and only one officer can be dispatched. She must hold out alone. As the masked teens circle the building like predators, Nancy hides in the kitchen, searching for her phone. Suddenly, she hears a police siren. Relief floods in. A lone officer arrives and begins surveying the area. He notices an open water tap, suggesting recent activity, and radios headquarters to report that everything appears under control. Nancy rushes out and describes the masked teens on mopeds. The officer's expression shifts, he recognizes them. They were just involved in the murder case he came from. The realization sends chills down Nancy's spine. Trying not to alarm her, the officer confirms the masked figures are responsible for something far more sinister. Before he can say more, one of the teens bursts in and fatally attacks the officer. Nancy reacts instinctively, fleeing to the storage room and hiding, her breath shallow and heart racing. Bobby appears moments later. Without hesitation, Nancy pulls him into the kitchen, both trying to remain unseen. But it's too late, the teens find them. They're tied up, forced to sit facing each other. The attackers mock them, demanding they kiss for their twisted amusement. Nancy resists, refusing to comply. Enraged, the masked figures drag her to the back of the restaurant. But she refuses to surrender. In a desperate act, she breaks free, grabs a knife, and slashes one of the attackers. Clutching the blade, she bolts from the restaurant. One of the teens pursues her on a moped. Nancy, retreating cautiously with the knife in hand, prepares to defend herself. But in the chaos, she accidentally stabs Peter. Paralyzed by shock, Nancy struggles to comprehend what she has just done. Before she can process the moment, a horrifying truth emerges: Jake, Bobby, and Bobby's brother Jackson were behind everything. To understand how events spiraled into this nightmare, we must rewind to the afternoon when Nancy fired Jake. Jake was a drug addict. His job at the restaurant wasn't about survival, it was a means to fund his addiction. His younger brother Peter, often coerced into obedience, accompanied him that afternoon to purchase drugs. Out of money, Jake pleaded with the dealer for credit, even brandishing a gun from his car's glove compartment. On their way back, high and unstable, Jake spotted a group of masked teenagers gathered around a bonfire. In his distorted state of mind, he blamed them for everything, believing their earlier disruption at the restaurant had triggered Nancy's anger and cost him his job. Consumed by rage, Jake attacked without hesitation, stabbing one teen and then opening fire on the rest in a brutal frenzy. Tragically, Peter, uninvolved and unwilling, was forced to go along with the carnage. After the massacre, Jake and Peter loaded the mopeds and masks into their car. Jake instructed Peter to head to the restaurant while he went to Bobby and Jackson's house. Still seething over Nancy's decision, Jake concocted a plan to prank her, disguising themselves with the stolen masks and mopeds. Bobby and Jackson, always eager for mischief, agreed. Bobby briefly questioned the origin of the gear, but Jake casually claimed he borrowed it from some teens nearby, assuring there was no cause for concern. Meanwhile, Peter arrived at the restaurant. Upon entering, he noticed his hands were still stained with blood. Panicked, he rushed to the back and scrubbed them clean at the water tap, the same tap the police officer would later observe. Soon after, Jake, Bobby, and Jackson arrived and began their reign of terror, banging on windows, lurking in shadows, and doing everything they could to frighten Nancy. Their plan worked. But when the police officer showed up, the group scattered and hid. As Nancy and the officer discussed the murder case, Jake, fearing exposure, crept up and fatally struck the officer. Nancy fled to the storage room, terrified. Bobby, witnessing the chaos unfold, began to feel remorse. Unlike the others, he hadn't anticipated things escalating so far. In a split-second decision, he removed his mask and pretended he had just arrived to help Nancy, but by then, the situation was beyond control. Then came the tragic moment. In a panic, Nancy accidentally stabbed Peter. He was never meant to be part of this nightmare, dragged into it solely because of Jake's selfishness. Yet Nancy wasn't entirely blameless. Had she handled Jake's dismissal with more care, perhaps none of this would have happened. As Peter bled out, Jake ordered Jackson to watch over Nancy while he and Bobby carried Peter inside to treat his wounds. But when Jackson let his guard down for a moment, Nancy seized the opportunity. She bolted toward the back of the restaurant, tripping over a bag of rotten meat, and that's when an idea struck her. Inside, Jake desperately tried to stop Peter's bleeding. Bobby, now fully aware of how far things had spiraled, discreetly grabbed the police officer's car keys. He needed a way out. At that same moment, Nancy's father, still on his date, repeatedly called Jake to discuss the firing. Despite Nancy's emotional decision, her father had never intended to let Jake go. He wanted to talk things through, maybe even ask him to stay. But it was too late. Jake had already crossed the line, and his phone remained unanswered in the car. Nancy found herself in a tense chase with Jackson, narrowly evading his attacks. In a desperate move, she threw hot oil at him, forcing him back before ultimately taking his life to survive. Breathing heavily, she hid under a table, scanning the blood-soaked floor, until she saw Bobby lying motionless, covered in blood. He had fought Jake but lost. At that moment, Tabitha arrived, responding to Nancy's earlier call. But upon seeing the carnage, she panicked and fled, leaving Nancy to fend for herself. Ignoring Tabitha's escape, Jake turned his attention to Nancy, who had bolted toward the storage room. As dawn broke, Nancy made a desperate run for freedom, but Jake was faster. He caught up to her, stabbed her from behind, and dragged her back into the restaurant. Unaware of her pregnancy, Jake plunged the knife into Nancy's stomach and left her for dead. But he was wrong. Nancy slowly opened her eyes, still alive. The rotten meat she had wrapped around her torso had absorbed most of the impact, preventing a fatal wound. Jake had been deceived. Struggling to her feet, Nancy glanced at Bobby, barely clinging to life. That's when she finally revealed the truth. The baby she was carrying was his, the result of a drunken night at a party. With no time to waste, Nancy grabbed the police car keys and made her way to Jake's house. She had to end this. Catching Jake off guard, she attacked him from behind, putting an end to his reign of terror once and for all. Weak from blood loss, she stumbled back to the restaurant. Moments later, her father arrived, taking in the horrifying scene. His voice trembled as he asked what had happened, and with that, the film ends.